Bill, in hindsight, seems obvious.
It's one of those things that and best ideas always do seem obvious in hindsight, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
but I can tell you that it was not something that was obvious. The genesis really comes back to just experiencing life. But in 2006, I left the day-to-day of PayCycle to start Bill.
Many SMB fintechs have failed. I'm going to ask you a question. What did you deliberately not chase so that you can be true to your focus and succeed where so many fintechs have failed in that space?
That stock is on cloud nine, up nearly 75% in the past year. Joining us now is founder and CEO of Bill.com.
Think about 1999, 2000. It was like, oh, I mean, I can release software any day of the week and I can actually improve it any day of the week. Like, that's super powerful as a developer. And so we were focused on that. But what I realized in 2001, it wasn't the software that was powerful, it was the data.
The software ETF IGV notching an all-time high this week. One of the top performing names in that fund, Bill Holding.
What it is that customers need, irrespective of what they're telling us, and then listening to customers on how to make it better. That's kind of the evolution that we've worked on at Bill, is constantly becoming more and more of an expert when it comes to SMBs, more and more of an expert when it comes to payments. We do a lot on payments that businesses don't really have the time to understand. And then, becoming an expert, if you will, on pulling all that together with technology, whether it's AI or whether it's, Java or C or whatever. Like, we're going to use all the capabilities of technology to be able to make the engine run.
Today's episode is a mini MBA for founders and leaders. Our guest is René Lacerte, who built Bill from the ground up, led it through an IPO, and scaled it into a public company with over $1.5 billion in annual revenue and a market cap exceeding $5 billion. We unpack the real lessons behind that journey: scaling culture, leading through uncertainty, building personal resilience, and mastering when to move patiently versus when to act with speed. This is a masterclass in leadership, scaling, and building momentum, building something special that lasts beyond the IPO moment. So let's go. So, René Lacerte, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It is an honor to have you. What a great story. We have incredible founders like you that come on the podcast and talk about, in very humble terms, how you had an idea, you brought it to life, and then a few years later, now you're a multi-billion-dollar organization. I'm incredibly inspired by your story because you started in very similar terms, like an idea to solve a pain point, right? Would love to kind of go back to your genesis story. Like, where did the idea for Bill come about? What inspired you? And let's go from there.
Okay. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. It's always good to be here. So, I think the genesis really comes back to just experiencing life. I grew up in and around small businesses. My parents and grandparents each had, north of half a dozen businesses, all of them since the 60s, serving SMBs. And so I had worked in accounting at Price Waterhouse, so I was pretty comfortable with the language of business, which is accounting. I moved into working for my parents' payroll company, writing code and developing operational capabilities for kind of like the first online payroll company out there, honestly. My dad had started in the 80s using 2400 baud modems to actually, transfer payroll files. Anyways, so I did that, and then I worked out Intuit, where I got to really learn the excellence of product management and the focus on customer orientation. And then I started a company called PayCycle. We were the kind of the first, and at the time when we sold, the largest online payroll company in the country. And we sold that to Intuit in 2009. But in 2006, I left the day-to-day of PayCycle to start Bill. And it was because when I was running PayCycle, I felt this pain point. And this pain point was, it was really having to walk around the office, collect invoices, talk to employees, understand whether invoices, should be paid or not. Were we happy with the work? Understanding the bills that we were sending out, whether they were getting paid by our partners or not. Understanding the reconciliation across all the transactions. And I realized that everything I was doing was the same way my parents and grandparents had done it. It was all paper-based, filing cabinets, checks being sent, checks being reconciled, in a return envelope with the bank statement. Like all these things were just painful. Sticky notes all over the place, files missing from the filing cabinet, not filed appropriately. And that pain point helped me really understand that there was something that technology could do. So this was, probably 2001, 2002, and we'd started this online payroll company. And the reason we started it was to focus on software delivery, meaning that, in the software world of Intuit at the time, there was a release once a year. And so you had to do everything. It was very rigorous product management, but everything depended on getting that right once a year. And the beauty of the web, right? If you think about 1999, 2000, it was like, oh, I mean, I can release software any day of the week and I can actually improve it any day of the week. Like that's super powerful as a developer. And so we were focused on that. But what I realized in 2001, it wasn't the software that was powerful, it was the data. And if you think about this 20 years later, right, 24 years later now, data is the essence of what's actually powering the AI, evolution and what's powered everything in the cloud. And so I think in that 2003, 4 window, I realized that I could solve all those pain points that my parents and grandparents had that I was having because the data could be centralized and be in the cloud, and I could leverage that across the customer experience to be able to make their experiences better. And so that was the genesis. It was something I started noodling at night, and when I couldn't stop noodling it, that's when I decided to leave the day-to-day pay cycle and start the next one, which is Bill.
Yeah, because
Bill, in hindsight, seems obvious, but take me back to when you were kind of looking at this, going, "Hey, there's a real world problem here." And I just want to understand how you kind of pinpointed that, and then inspired you to kind of start taking action.
Well, I mean, I appreciate, actually, thank you for saying it's obvious. I mean, I think it's one of those things that, and best ideas always do seem obvious in hindsight, right? And so, but I can tell you that it was not something that was obvious. When I told my dad about it, and he was supportive and didn't really get it until I showed him a demo. And I showed him a demo in 2007. And it was actually, people ask me sometimes, how did you know you had something? It's like, well, product company was a year old, and I showed him the demo. And when I'm done with the 10-minute demo, he turns to me and says, "Holy shit, René, I had no idea that's what you're talking about. That solves all of my pain points that I ever had running a business. Godspeed, have fun, all that good stuff," right? And so I knew that there was something there. But then when I went to the first customers, nobody would do it except people I knew. And it was because they trusted me. And they're like, "Look, I don't really have that problem. Like it works. I have a filing cabinet. Like do something else. I have other problems you need to fix. Like just try it." And so they would try it. And then 90 days later, they'd come back and they would say, "I had no idea. I didn't understand my business that well because I didn't have all the documents. I didn't have all the support, the reconciliation. I didn't have the information I need to be able to run the business." And so that was the first part of being like, okay, well, this is something that's critical for businesses, and I need to keep listening to what their experience is. But the other thing I will kind of say on this, and this is always hard for folks, is that there is the Henry Ford statement where he says, if you ask the customer what they want, they'd say a faster horse. And so that's not our job as software developers, is not to ask people what they want. I think once you have something, it is to ask them what they want, to make sure that you're hearing their experiences and understanding how to make it better for them. But the job of a software developer is to be an expert on the life of their customer and understand the pain points better than the customer does. Customers don't think about their pain points. They think about driving, customer adoption, or they think about, something, uniquely, to their passion that they started out with. So I think that focus of saying what it is that customers need, irrespective of what they're telling us, and then listening to customers on how to make it better, that's kind of the, the evolution that we've worked on at Bill, is constantly becoming more and more of an expert when it comes to SMBs, more and more of an expert when it comes to payments. We do a lot on payments that businesses don't really have the time to understand. And then, becoming an expert, if you will, on pulling all that together with technology, whether it's AI or whether it's, Java or C or whatever. Like, we're going to use all the capabilities of technology to be able to make the engine run.
It's fascinating because, many SMB fintechs have failed. So what what did you deliberately, I'm going to ask you a question. What did you deliberately not chase so that you can be true to your focus and succeed where so many fintechs have failed in that space?
Well, I think the first thing that I would start with, just the first answer comes to mind, is that, patience does matter. And I think one of the things as an entrepreneur, and I've said this before, but I think it's really worth saying again, entrepreneurship is about the perfect balance of patience and impatience. Impatience is what gets you off your ass to go do something, right? That's exactly why you started your company. It's why I started my company. I thought the world could be better, right? That's impatient. Patience is, okay, I'm going to let the market develop. I'm going to let the software develop. I'm going to let customer relationships develop. I'm going to take time. And every now and then you push because you get impatient. And so that balance of patience and impatience, I think, is super, important. And it's one that, now that Bill's, 20 years old, I've been obviously working on that for a long time. And it is one that I would say I never get tired of actually, exploring and thinking about, like, am I being impatient enough, or am I being too patient? These are all things that I think entrepreneurs should be thinking about every day. And I think, what we found is that customers really do value saving time. And that was always that we have a very strong purpose-built mission. Our mission is to make it simple to connect and do business. Nobody gets in business to actually do the finances except for me. I mean, most people don't think so. When you ask the question about fintech, it's like, well, our mission was actually to eliminate the pain points of connecting and doing business. I mean, doing business should be about the joy of business, or whatever your passion is. It shouldn't be about the hassle of business, which we all have. Life has plenty of hassles. And so if we can eliminate those hassles, then that enables people to actually go be more creative and pursue their passion. So one thing on why we succeeded, we had this long-term view. An example of things I did not always choose, and this may be counter to many entrepreneurs, I did not choose the investor that gave me the highest valuation. I turned down investors that gave me higher valuations. And I think it was important because I wanted to have that that simpatico, if you will, on the mission and the culture of the company. And many things where I don't, for example, believe in 10x class shares. I don't believe in dual class shares, and I chose not to go down that path. I wanted to be held accountable, and so I think the question on success doesn't always come back to fintech. To me, it comes back to kind of what are the elements of my entrepreneurship story that were unique to me that helped me be successful. And the reason I talked about the dual class shares is it has forced me, not having that has forced a level of accountability along the way that has made me a better CEO. And I think that matters for everybody who's in the seat to realize that they've got, I would say, multiple hats that we wear. You wear a founder hat, and that's never going to change. You wear a CEO hat, and that is going to change. You wear a board member hat, which has different fiduciary responsibilities than CEO, and that will also change over time. The only one that doesn't change is founder. The others change, and you have to earn your right to be there for those seats. And so, for me, like, those types of decisions actually help keep me honest around the journey that I'm on.
That's so insightful. We could do a whole masterclass on just those, personal traits and that commitment to those values. Maybe you can speak a bit about, as the company started scaling, what are some of the things you had to hone in on from a personal leadership perspective, as well as maybe some of the things you had to stop doing as the company hit a certain size threshold?
Yeah, I think one of the more important things I did in company number 2 compared to company number 1 is I had a coach. So I've had a coach, for the entire existence of Bill. That coach has meant, meeting at least twice a month for the last 20 years. We cover, I've had 2 different coaches, but we cover all sorts of topics from executional, questions to obviously leadership questions to personal questions, right? And so I think one of the things that I've focused on is making sure that in order to develop that, you have somebody on the outside keeping you honest. I think the dual class share thing also keeps my board honest, keeps me honest, and I think that's important. I think that, things that I've had to change, if you will, like I think a lesson from company one to company two was, the buck stops with me. And I have to accept that. The first company, it was had a co-founder, and we had somebody else that we brought in as a COO that we treated as a Trump friend, and that's hard. It's hard for employees. It's hard for the board. It's hard for people to know who's in charge and who's going to make the decision. And so for me, when I started Bill, I was clear that I needed to be responsible and accountable to myself for those decisions. And so one of the things, for example, I did probably, I don't know, a dozen years ago, I changed my title from founder and CEO to CEO and founder. Because the job, this is the point that I just mentioned, that I needed a reminder every day that the CEO job is earned. It's earned from your employees, it's earned from your board, it's earned from the market. And what that means, I have to be accountable for the decisions that the company makes, good and bad. And so to your question, that's just like a mindset that helps me. One of the things that helps with is understanding that over time, teams have to change. And it's never fun to change your teams, but I feel good about the fact that we've had a lot of great people in the company, and when they've moved on, I remain friends and stay connected, and they do great and they root for Bill. And so, like, there is this, I think, maybe a fallacy I had in company one, that there was no way to do change without losing those connections and those friendships, and so that kept them and me from making decisions around change. And that, I think, is critical when you think about what makes a company. It's going to be the leadership team that's driving the priorities and the initiatives across the company. And so having clarity about it's okay to leave, and it's okay to be asked to leave. Like, that doesn't change the work you did. It doesn't change the friendships that were made. So
very,
I
very
could ramble on
insightful
about that, but.
No, that I actually want to get into scaling, because that's a good segue into that, because many of our founders that watch the show are sort of at that cusp of scaling past like 100 to 200 employees, and they're looking at like changing the profile of the business, both from the leadership profiles, putting in processes that maybe didn't exist when they were a smaller company. So would love to hear your perspective on, when does business processes and operating discipline start to show up without adding layers of bureaucracy, but to allow you to scale globally maybe. And then this notion of like, do you have to look for maybe new leadership talent to go from early stage to now more, or do you develop the talent you have to help you grow at a much bigger scale?
Yeah. So I'd say the first thing, this is easier to say than it is to do, but to be building a business, always thinking, the end game. And the end game to me isn't an exit. The end game is a sustainable business that thrives on its own, right? Regardless of me being here or any of the leaders being here, right? I think ultimately when you start a company, I think that's one of the goals, is that you want this company to actually be independent. Just like when you have kids, you want them to thrive and be independent and have their own values and all that, but you want them to be able to have success. So that end game for me has meant always thinking long term. And so some of the processes you talk about, like, I was thinking about that day one. Okay, someday, we are going to be moving 1% of GDP. What are the things we need to put in place today so that we can have the controls and the trust that is required to move money? What are the things we need to put in place today so that we can grow with that as it moves? And so if I wasn't thinking about that end game of always being a trusted place for people to move money, to send and receive money, I probably would have poo-pooed, if you will, the beginning of all the risk monitoring that we did by hand using Excel spreadsheets.
Mm.
And yet that created the DNA for us to actually understand and become experts around risk and money movement.
Mm.
And so then that becomes something you can build into a process over time. Now that team is much bigger today than it was, when we were in a small house, with 10 employees. But it does, I think, point to how you always have to be thinking about, where you're going. You can't just be thinking about what I need today. That's the balancing act of patience versus impatience. And there's obviously we didn't build the perfect system back then, but we did enough that we could understand so we could grow and scale. And so I think, across processes, one of the things that, I mean, everything changes, but one of the things that doesn't change is kind of the culture and the values of the company. And if you do it right, the culture and the values are the DNA, they're the foundation of the company. But what happens as you get bigger at 2,100 employees, how do you help everyone understand and appreciate what those values are? How do you help people, managers, for example, understand? How do you align the coaching that we do for employees around those values? And so those are systems that obviously get developed over time. And you go from, mixing margaritas and making guacamole for the team and having a conversation when we're 30 or 40 employees to now having, today we have a company meeting where I will talk about things that are super important to the company to kind of help folks understand the cultural alignment. So processes change, but there's always an end game. And when it comes to scaling people, I think it really depends on the person. And I think at Bill, and I've already used this word a few times, I think we're a culture, a team of experts. And so expertise requires constant honing of your skill, whether that's, a musician or whether that's an athlete, like you're constantly trying to make it better. And so for those people in our culture that are very strong at actually constantly trying to self-improve, they have a very long career path at Bill. For those that don't know how to self-improve, they can still contribute and feel part of it and feel great. But they might end up not being here as long, right, as others. And so I think the choosing to grow, sometimes it's a attribute of the individual. Sometimes it's an attribute of the company or the leader who's managing them. There may be time when you don't have the time to have somebody grow into a role. And that's happened, I would say, for most of the people that have been reporting to me that have not, that aren't reporting to me today, is probably, either more there wasn't time for them to develop this necessary skill, or they wanted to go do something else, right? And so that transition is something that, I actually talked about up front. I had one of my coaches said to me early on, he said, look, people don't seem to understand this. When you are hired as the CEO, accept that you've been fired, get over it and move on, right? And so the conversation that I have had I've had many friends work with me, is like, our friendship is our friendship. Personal is personal. Business is business. If it comes to the fact that you don't like working here, which has happened, or it's not the right place for you, which has happened, we'll have a conversation, but our friendship's not going to change. And none of it has. Like, we've maintained all sorts of great connections and helped each other, in and outside of Bill. So I think being direct up front, and that wasn't exactly your question, but like when you work closely with people, you're going to become friends, right? At least I am. Like, you earn and are given respect. There's just an amount of trust that develops when you work together for years. And so it becomes hard when you have to make, some of these decisions in either direction. And so I think making sure that people understand what's personal is personal, what's business is business.
Yeah, I think one of the themes I hear consistently is, being a founder is, can be the best of times and the worst of times, and then the best of times often is about the people, right? Like the relationships you build along the way. Looking back at like multiple successes now in scaling, what do you think are like some of the most common mistakes in hindsight that you would, advise, early founders on, paying attention to?
I do think one of the most critical things is the culture. And because the culture is what governs the company when you're not around. And by the way, just like with anyone's kids, I mean, you're not around. right? Like
Yeah.
even when you think when they're 6 years old, you're around. You're not. They're at school more than they're at school more than they are with you, right? And
Yeah.
I think that, having a foundation around, hey, this is how we think about things allows people to make those decisions. And so I think the scaling thing really comes back to being very clear. Like we've always talked about the culture. I think it's super important. We do not have what I would call aspirational values. Many companies will have aspirational values. I would say that we have foundational values. We try hard to understand who it is as a person that we like working with and what's required of that person as a person, not, irrespective of what they're doing anywhere in the world. And we align on that before they come in. And then when they're here, we all do that. So that's being authentic, it's being humble, it's being passionate, it's being accountable, and it's having fun together. Those aren't aspirational. They're just descriptive words of who we are. And everybody knows that. And then if the leaders model that, which, we work hard, we don't work hard to model, but we make sure that we're not afraid to show that we're modeling it. That allows us to, continue to, I think, keep the mentorship going across the company. So I think that's one that people miss is like spend time on the culture, understand what your foundational values are. That is going to be what governs the company. It's going to be the glue that keeps teams together. I think having a very clear mission is super important. Like everybody at Bill identifies with SMBs. SMBs, and I think are, the special sauce of the economy. I think a lot of people say that, but I think it's more important than the economy. I think they're part of what makes a community special. If you think about whether it's Toronto or Miami, your favorite places to go eat or go shop or go be aren't going to be chains. They're going to be something local that's going to have a little flavor of that community. And so that's something that's super important, I think, to make sure that our customers know that they're heard and that our employees love working on SMB problems. So those two things mean that even though there's lots of other things I may not get right every day, that's a governing principle that actually helps us get things right every day. I think, being clear on when you're going to be patient and when you're going to be impatient, that's the hardest one for me, right? Because, if you're going to be impatient all the time, well, then that's a dictator. And, people don't really like working for dictators. And that long term doesn't actually build a culture that can sustain itself, in my opinion, right? So to me, balancing and letting the best of other people's ideas come out, that's, it's really fun to watch, but it's also really hard to know when is the time for me to be impatient to say, do it this way. So.
Yeah, it's really, and I work on this a lot, how to teeter between being patient and when to kind of maybe speed things up culturally. So it's something that I think every founder, things can never happen fast enough, but your words are so wise to know when to have patience, and it's great for all of us to hear that in business, right? So let's move a bit to your personal journey in terms of what leadership lessons have you picked up along the way of this great journey that's still unfolding that you would use to chart your future and also help next generation of leaders. What are some of the things that have really become ingrained as part of your value system?
My coach and I talk about one thing in particular around hiring employees. There's a choice. You can have mercenaries or you can have missionaries. And mercenaries are essentially hired for a paycheck. And missionaries are there for a purpose and a mission. And obviously we pay people well. We have to pay people well. It's a competitive market. But ultimately, I want people to want to be here more than anything because they identify with the mission and the culture of the company, not because of the money, right? Money is just a byproduct of what we need to do because people need to make a living. And so I think that means, like, how do you make sure you have a culture, an environment where you're able to attract the people that are attracted to the mission, that they're not there just for the paycheck. And that goes back to the things I just said around, culture and mission, I think are super important. I think another, tenet and principle, which we talked about at the beginning of the podcast here, was, balancing innovation with customer needs. And the way we talked about it was Henry Ford's statement that, hey, if you ask the customer what they want, it'd be a faster horse. There is a need, and there are plenty of companies that they only do what customers ask them to do. And I think that leads to incremental improvements. And it's actually the size company that we're at right now. It's actually one of the hardest things, because you think about our scale, 500,000 businesses, 1% of GDP. There's so much stuff going on from customers right now that we could incrementally make our product better until the end of time. Because customers are always going to be like, oh, that could be a little bit better. Oh, that could be a little bit better. That's not the game changer. Why are we here? Because we understood a pain point. We were experts around SMB financial operations. We understood a pain point better than anybody, better than customers. Customers didn't want what we were going to go build. And so that balance of innovation, like, okay, customers need us to make that incremental improvement. Yeah, we got to do that. Versus, you know what? We can blow all this out of the water. We can totally game change the experience for customers. They don't know it. They're not going to ask for it. And we have to then have that conviction to go do that. That is not an easy thing to balance, but that's one of the things when you ask, over time leadership lessons, that's one of the things we focus on here, is like making sure that innovation is front and center, that we're not just listening to customers on the incremental, that we are actually leveraging our expertise around problems that the customers have, technologies that we understand, and the skills, domain expertise that we bring as humans, that we can leverage that into a better, experience for customers. And, we just did an example of that. AI is a big thing right now, obviously, and we announced an agent in October that was to collect W-9s. So every business that pays people has to collect W-9s. Well, we didn't ask companies what they wanted. We went and said, this is a pain point, and we have an agent that goes and collects W-9s. We have 10,000 customers signed up for it already. Over 40,000 W-9s collected. We expect it'll be 3 million this year. Like, that's a tremendous amount of load that we just took off that customers weren't asking for. So that's balancing innovation with actually customer input. And so it's kind of this combination. I think that's important. And then very tactical things on leadership lessons. Hire a coach, make time for it. Like, everybody's like, oh, I don't have time. This is the most important thing I think any CEO can do for themselves. And the reason I think that is, I've used this analogy because it's funny, I can't remember the first time somebody said this. Somebody said, hey, you know what? It's got to be lonely at the top. I mean, you're the top dog, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's not lonely at the top. You have no idea. I'm not at the top. I'm in the middle. This is an hourglass. When you are the CEO of a company, especially a public company, you've got, investors and customers on top of you, and you got employees below you. And some days it's the exact opposite. Employees become number one thing, and investors become the thing on the bottom. And it's information that's going between. And my job is to funnel the right information in both directions. It's not, so it's lonely because there's just not a lot of people there, right? So when you think about like that fact that it is a lonely job, who do you go talk to about it? And so for me, a coach needs to be somebody I talk to about everything, because for me, my job is a 24/7 job. Like, and by the way, most of my friends, like, they don't understand. Like, we went to the Warriors game last night, and on the way back, I pulled up my laptop and I worked, and they're like, you have to work? I'm like, yes. Like, I work, but I'm going to have some fun, right? I was at the game for a couple hours, and like that ability to say, like, if it is a 24/7 job, then that means your coach has to help you as a human, in my opinion. So I don't just ask for expertise on how do I be a better CEO. Like, I go in and I'm like, you know what? This stress of being in the middle is hard. Help me think through it today. Or, you know what? I missed this from my kid's event. Or, my kid's going through this issue. I don't know how to think about it. Or my board's being challenging on this issue. I'm worried they're going to be challenging on this issue. Who do you get to share that with? And when you build rapport, like I have with both coaches I had for a number of years, you end up having consistency in message and experience that helps you understand yourself. Right. And that's the thing, like, to give me the energy, like, you need the help in being able to understand how any of us are growing, how any of us are fitting into the scheme of life. And a coach does that. And I think it's, super, super important. And, I would say another leadership lesson: relish accountability. It's not fun being the bad guy sometimes, but that is the job. Do it humanely, do it thoughtfully, do it lovingly, but know that when you get to make the choice, that's what people expect of you, and it's how you do it that changes their lives.
Mhm.
Being an ass is easy. Being
Yeah.
compassionate, being loving, that's the hard part. And I think that's something that and maybe the last thing I would say on this is on leadership lessons. Everyone should expect and know that the impact they have on their teams is something that goes on for decades.
Mhm.
And the example I give on this is my dad had an employee that worked for him. They both had been past, let's say, 15 or 20 years. And one year at Thanksgiving, the son of my dad's employee called my brother, who had the same name as my dad, and
Mhm.
just said, "Look, I called because I wanted to say thank you. The best days in our house were when my dad worked for you, and he was always happy when he came home and had dinner with the family."
Wow.
And I don't think we understand and appreciate that everybody, including us as CEOs, take all the baggage into the front door when we sit down and have dinner with our loved ones. And if you can make a place that baggage is a little less baggagey, that has a huge impact. And so that the other piece of advice is like, play the long game. Don't play the short game. And that's part of the long game.
Brilliant, brilliant. I feel like we can do a whole masterclass on like values-based leadership. And I'm definitely going to ask you to come back because our viewers are just going to have so much wisdom packaged here. I know you have a hard stop, so I'm going to ask you one last question. When people study Bill years from now, what do you hope they understand about how it was built? Not just that it was a clear success, market dominant player, but what do you want Bill to be remembered and thought about?
So intentionality, hard work, perseverance, grit, endurance. I think people oftentimes look for the hype to build a company. Life is not one on the hype. It really isn't. Like today's society makes you think it is. Every battle that was ever won that needed to be won was because of the things I just said. Intentionality, grit, perseverance, endurance, love, not hate, right? Like those are the things that win in the long run. And I think it's easy to forget that because there's too much hype right now and everybody's like, "Oh, well, so and so, did this." Like, don't worry about that. What's your intention? What's your, leverage your grit, have the perseverance and endurance to beat everybody else. So
What a great way to end it, Renee. I'm going to ask you to come back because you have been such a profound, you made such a profound impact on our show today. Some of the lessons you've shared have been really impactful for me personally. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to staying connected.
yeah, likewise, Jerome. Thank you. Looking forward to it as well. Take care.
Okay.